It was one of those long, quiet afternoons where the air inside the house felt heavier than usual. The kind of day where the clock seemed to slow, and every sound felt like it echoed just a little too loud. I was sprawled out on the couch, flipping aimlessly through channels, half watching some old rerun I'd already seen a dozen times. Dad had left a couple of hours ago. Something about running errands, picking up supplies, and meeting a friend for coffee. Said he wouldn't be back until the evening. I barely responded when he told me. Honestly, I was counting down the minutes until I had the place to myself. Or so I thought. She was still here. My stepmom, Melissa. She'd been in my life for about 5 years now. Married my dad when I was finishing up high school. And from the first day we met, there was something different about her. Not just that she was beautiful, though she absolutely was. Early 40s, but you wouldn't guess it. She had that effortless, natural beauty some women spend a lifetime chasing. Long, dark hair tied loosely behind her neck. Eyes sharp and knowing. Lips that curled into a smile just before she said something clever. But it wasn't just how she looked. It was the way she carried herself. The way she walked into a room and made it feel like everyone else had been holding their breath until she arrived. And lately, the way she looked at me. I heard the soft shuffle of her slippers before I saw her. She appeared in the doorway, holding a glass of lemonade, her other hand resting casually on her hip. She was wearing a loose tank top and shorts that hugged her legs just right. I tried not to stare. Failed, obviously. "You're not going to find anything good on at this hour," she said, nodding toward the TV. I shrugged. Yeah, just killing time. Melissa leaned against the doorframe, sipping from her glass. For a second, she watched me in silence. Then her lips curved into that knowing smile, the one that always made me wonder if she could somehow hear my thoughts. "It's too nice a day to be cooped up inside," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "Too hot." She laughed softly. "Fair enough." And just like that, she crossed the room and sat on the opposite end of the couch. Close, but not too close. Close enough that I noticed a faint scent of her perfume. Something floral and soft that drifted in the air between us. We sat there for a few minutes, neither of us speaking. I flipped the channel some more. She absent-mindedly scrolled through her phone, but there was a tension in the silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that hummed just beneath the surface, like static before a storm. Eventually, she set her phone down on the coffee table and turned slightly toward me. "You know," she started, her voice light but deliberate, "it's been really nice having you back home for a bit." I glanced at her, surprised. "Yeah, I figured I was just in the way." She shook her head. "Not at all. It's comforting, actually. The house feels less empty." I nodded slowly. "Well, glad to help." Another pause, longer this time, and then she added, almost as if thinking out loud, "Your dad's been busy lately." I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say to that? She looked at me, eyes lingering for just a second too long. It's just nice to have someone around who notices me. That did something to me. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but my mind was already racing. Was that meant to mean something? Or was I reading too much into it? Melissa stood suddenly, walking toward the kitchen. "Want something to drink?" Sure," I said, voice catching slightly. She disappeared behind the corner, and I exhaled, trying to pull myself together. I'd had harmless thoughts about her before, but they were just that. Thoughts. Fantasies you'd never say out loud. That's all they were supposed to be. Except now, I wasn't so sure she hadn't been thinking them too. She came back a moment later, handed me a glass. Our fingers brushed. Hers lingered, maybe a second too long. "Thanks," I murmured. Melissa sat back down, this time closer than before, her bare knee just barely touching mine. "So," she said, her tone playful but edged with something sharper, "what should we do to kill the time before your dad gets back?" I looked at her, really looked at her. the way her lips parted slightly as she waited for my answer, the glint in her eye that dared me to say something reckless. My heart pounded, and I tried to come up with a safe reply. I don't know. Whatever you want. She tilted her head, studying me like I was some puzzle she was figuring out. Then she leaned in just a little, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Well, she said, lips curling into that dangerous smile, let's do this quickly before your dad gets back. And for a moment, the whole world felt like it stopped. I didn't move, didn't breathe, because I knew in that moment she wasn't talking about passing the time with a movie or some harmless game. She was talking about us, about crossing the line we both had been dancing around for months. The silence stretched between us, charged and impossible to ignore. And as I looked into her eyes, I realized I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to say no. Not anymore. And that's when I heard the faint sound of the clock ticking on the wall, each second counting down to whatever was about to happen next. For a moment, all I could hear was the dull ticking of the clock. Melissa's word hung in the air like smoke, curling around us, impossible to ignore. Let's do this quickly before your dad gets back. She didn't blink, didn't pull back. If anything, she seemed to lean in closer, her eyes searching mine, waiting to see if I would flinch. But I didn't, because the truth was, I didn't want to. It felt like we had been circling this moment for months, maybe longer. 1,000 tiny glances, accidental touches, half-finished thoughts neither of us had been brave enough to voice. Until now, what exactly are we doing? I asked, the words dry in my throat, though we both already knew the answer. Melissa's smile deepened, soft and secretive, as if we were suddenly the only two people in the world who understood the rules of this dangerous game. Whatever we want, she whispered, standing up with a casual grace that sent my pulse into overdrive. She walked toward the hallway, casting a glance over her shoulder. Come on, before we run out of time. And like a moth to a flame, I followed. The house felt different as we moved. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows felt louder, sharper. My senses were on high alert, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Melissa led me into the guest room, the same room I'd been staying in since I got back from college, the same room where I'd laid awake nights, thinking about moments just like this, convinced they would only ever exist in my imagination. But now, here we were. She closed the door softly behind us, leaving it just slightly ajar, like even now part of her couldn't fully commit to shutting the world out. We shouldn't, I said quietly, though my body was already betraying me by stepping closer. Melissa reached up, smoothing a hand over my shoulder, fingertips lingering at the base of my neck. You're right, we shouldn't. Neither of us moved. Neither of us stopped. And then, just like that, she kissed me. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't unsure. It was a kiss that had been waiting too long to happen, full of heat and frustration and relief all tangled together. Her hand slid up into my hair as I wrapped my arms around her waist, pulling her in as if we'd both just realized how badly we needed this, how badly we needed each other. The world outside that room stopped existing. It was just us, breathless, reckless, the soft rustle of fabric, the way her nails dragged lightly across my back, the quiet, gasping laughter that bubbled up when we bumped into the edge of the bed. And still, beneath all the urgency, there was this thread of fear, this awareness that at any moment the front door could swing open, that my dad could call out from the hallway, completely unaware of what was unfolding just a few rooms away. It only made everything feel sharper, more dangerous, more real. We have to be fast, Melissa murmured against my neck. We can't get caught. But the urgency wasn't enough to stop us. It barely even slowed us down. And somehow, that made it all the more impossible to resist. Minutes passed, though they felt like seconds. And just when I thought we were finally lost in the moment, when I thought nothing could pull us back to reality, There was a sudden, distant sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Melissa froze. My heart nearly stopped. For a split second, we both just stood there, still tangled together, both of us holding our breath as if we could somehow will the car to keep driving past. But it didn't. The engine cut off. A door slammed shut. And then we heard it. The sound of keys jingling, footsteps approaching the front porch. Panic surged through me. Melissa's eyes were wide as she pulled away, already smoothing her hair, adjusting her clothes with quick, practiced movements. "Get back to the living room," she whispered urgently. "Now, act normal." I nodded, adrenaline pounding through my veins, and slipped out the door. By the time Dad walked inside, we were both right where we were supposed to be. Melissa was in the kitchen, pretending to check something on her phone. I was back on the couch, TV remote in hand, like I'd never moved. Dad called out a casual greeting, none the wiser. And somehow we pulled it off. But as the front door clicked shut behind him, and he busied himself unloading groceries, I felt Melissa's gaze drift toward me from across the room. It wasn't just a glance. It was a promise, a silent acknowledgement that this was only the beginning. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was more afraid of getting caught, or of how much I wanted it to happen again. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Dinner was a quiet affair. Dad chatted about his day, oblivious, while Melissa and I barely spoke. I kept my head down, forcing food into my mouth, pretending to listen, but all I could think about was the weight of her gaze from across the table. Every time I dared to glance up, there she was, eyes lingering just long enough to remind me that the afternoon hadn't been a dream. It happened, and now everything felt different. After dinner, Dad went to the garage to tinker with one of his endless projects. He said he'd be out there for a while, probably lost in his tools, until bedtime, which meant we were alone again. Melissa cleared the dishes, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she was waiting for me to make the first move. I watched from the couch, the silence between us growing heavier by the second. And then, finally, she spoke. "Come here," she said softly, almost like a suggestion instead of command. I stood, heart pounding, and walked toward the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "That was risky," she said, though there was no real scolding in her tone. "Yeah," I agreed, "really risky." But neither of us apologized. We both knew we wouldn't take it back. Melissa studied me carefully, her eyes searching mine like she was trying to decide what came next. "This doesn't have to mean anything," she whispered. "It could just be, today, just a mistake we never talk about again." But we both knew that was a lie, because it already meant something. It had from the moment she leaned in close and told me we had to be quick. "I don't want it to be a mistake," I said quietly. And for the first time all night, her careful mask slipped. I saw it, just for a second, the relief. The same wild, reckless one I'd been feeling all day. "Neither do I," she admitted. The room felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls themselves had closed in to keep our secret. "What do we do now?" I asked. Melissa's lips curved into that slow, dangerous smile again, the one that always made me feel like we were already too far gone to turn back. "We're careful," she said. "We stay smart. No more slip-ups. Not with him around." I nodded, but part of me wondered how long we could actually keep this going. How long until we got careless? How long until Dad noticed the glances that lingered too long, the accidental touches, the missing moments when neither of us could quite explain where we'd been? But that worry wasn't enough to stop me. Not anymore. Later that night, after Dad went to bed, I found Melissa in the backyard. The air was cool, the sky dark and cloudless. She sat on one of the loungers, staring up at the stars like they held all the answers we were too afraid to ask. I sat beside her, close enough that our shoulders brushed. Neither of us said anything for a while. We didn't have to. Finally, she broke the silence. I didn't plan for this to happen, she said. I didn't I didn't expect you to come home and make everything feel different. I didn't expect you to notice me like this, I admitted. She turned to me, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. How could I not notice you? And just like that, the space between us disappeared. Another kiss, slower this time. Not rushed, not desperate, just real. And I realized in that moment that this wasn't going to be something we could chalk up to a one-time mistake. This was the start of something much more dangerous, much more permanent. And whether it lasted a week or a month or until the moment we got caught, we were both already in too deep. Melissa pulled away just slightly, her forehead resting against mine. "We have to be careful," she whispered again. "I know. Your dad can never find out. He won't. I promised. Even if I wasn't sure how we'd pull it off. Even if part of me knew secrets like this never stayed hidden forever. But in that moment, with her fingers laced through mine and the night wrapping around us like a cocoon, none of that mattered. Because all I cared about was her. And whatever this was we had started, and how much further we were both willing to go. As I walked back inside that night, I felt it. Something shifting. A line crossed. A point of no return. But instead of fear, all I felt was anticipation. Because tomorrow would come, and we would find a way, just like we always did. And somehow I already knew this was only the beginning.